Pretty good one, yeah. All right, Larry, then we'll
When
proceed.
lost from the flock they are following, they become extremely frightened.
Right. Are we all clear, Pat? Okay. Your life is what it is tonight as you're seated here, in all its wretchedness, with all your problems, with all your suppressions and all your pretenses and all your phoniness. Your lives are what they are tonight as you're seated here because you've never made an effort to invite a certain virtue, a certain strength, a certain characteristic that could come into your life and work for you. This particular virtue, which I'll name in a minute, must come to you. You can't go and try to build it of yourself. You can only build a facsimile of it, a false virtue. This particular virtue is necessary for all of you if you want to be different, if you want to be free and independent in fact and not just in words, not just in ideas and thoughts. This virtue cannot come from anything that you presently possess. It is presently not yours. It can be invited, however. And I'll say the virtue in just one word, which it is, in its shortest version. And then we'll go on from there. Have you ever heard of the word dare? D-A-R-E. That one word, thought about, studied, making connections with it. That one word could begin to give you, yes, the intelligence to begin to invite a daring that you now don't have. Daring for what? Oh, you have plenty of bluff, plenty of fakery. We're talking about a daring having to do with your inner state, having to change the way you go through life, your very nature, the way you think and feel and react, the way you talk, the way you live generally. We're not talking about daring to go out and do some foolish thing on a skateboard or down at the lake. We're not talking about physical daring or daring with words in which you think you're daring because you're rude to someone. Call it rudeness, not daring. To dare to investigate what's going on inside of you all day long and all night long. Dare to investigate it, which would be the first step in your invitation to change everything in your life, because you're changing who you are. When you change who you are, which you don't know what I'm talking about at all, you don't know what I'm talking about. And don't you sit there and assume that you do, because I am aware of how your minds have reacted already to what I've said. You've already associated it wrongly with certain things you want, certain little greedy pursuits that you have. I am talking tonight about a daring you have no idea of, because it isn't a part of your life. It can be if you have 1 ounce of beginning intelligence to listen carefully to what you're going to hear tonight and then apply it for the rest of your life once you go out of that door. Most human beings have no daring at all. They want to sit back just as you do, all you sincere students, just as you sit back and play it safe. You won't dare, some of you won't even dare to ask a question in this class. You want to play it so safe. Do you want to make it to the heights? Or do you want to go back to your old life when you go out of this room, only worse. You'll make a decision at the end of the meeting tonight. I want to tell you a story about a man and a woman who dared. And maybe the illustration will tell you a little more, and you can begin to understand it. There was a cruise ship that set off from the port to go on a lengthy pleasure cruise. 200 or 300 people on board, large ship, luxurious, stocked with food and drink and all the things necessary for a pleasant and extended tour. So everyone got on the boat, moved out of harbor, went out into the ocean. And of course, because they went for pleasure, the pleasure began at once. The parties began, and the games on deck, and the talking, and the socializing, and the drinking, and the dining. And everyone had what they called a good time. And they all knew that they had what they called a destination. The ship was going to some far-off port, some pretty island, where they would stay for a few days, then move to another island. They paid a lot of money, very expensive cruise. Ship moved out, and they all had fun from the very first day. This went on for a week. They had a long time to go on the cruise yet. At the end of a week, out in the middle of the ocean somewhere, a great storm came up. Thunder, lightning flashed and assaulted the ship. Great, huge waves. But they weren't particularly concerned. In fact, it was kind of exciting to them. They hadn't been in a storm before. So they stayed in their cabins or went to the dining hall, and they were assured of safety by the captain coming in his uniform, his cap, and he was cheerful and friendly to them. And by all the other officers with their uniforms on. They were assured that everything was all right, so they weren't particularly panicky. But the storm was pretty severe and went on for several days. So some of the passengers began to get a little panicky, and they began to suspect that maybe the storm had broken something on the ship. They didn't know the mechanics of how you steer a ship, but they sensed from the feel of it, you could even sense those things, that the boat wasn't being directed as it had been before the storm. And they began to get a little worried, and they started asking short, brief questions of the captain and the crew. He assured them all was fine, no problem. We're in command here, we're in charge. Sit back and have a good time. You've paid your money, you might as well enjoy the cruise. So reassured, they then went on with their games and with their parties. A second storm came up, equal to the first, just as furious. Captain kept assuring them that all was well. But this time they weren't quite so assured. And they began to look out and study things. Some of the men who had been on boats before, they looked out, and they could tell that the ship wasn't steering on course, that it was wavering back and forth. And this was definite, and the word and the rumor spread around that the ship was actually floundering. It had no direction anymore. And they asked the captain about it, and he said, well, it's true that the storms threw us off course a little bit, and the rudder isn't working properly. However, we're in charge, you have nothing to worry about. But they suspected they did, because the ship got so bad that it started going in large circles, and they could tell that. And they couldn't believe the captain and the crew anymore when they reassured them. So panicky people get furious, do they not? So they began making sharp remarks to the captain, saying, what kind of a captain are you? First of all, you let the ship flounder like this, and secondly, you must have lied to us. You told us that all was well, and we can see for ourselves that it isn't well. He tried once more to placate them, but it didn't do any good. Finally, the whole ship, all the 200 or 300 passengers, became mutinous against the captain, against the crew. And they threatened to take the ship over, and the captain said, it's a very serious thing, you know, to take over a ship. Trust us, we know what we're doing, we'll bring you out of this safely. ship continued going in circles, and all the passengers knew it. But it was a very strange situation, and listen to this very peculiar situation. While the ship was listing from side to side, going in circles, running into fogs, heavy fogs, obviously not going in any definite direction, all the time that they were complaining against the captain and seeing the ship mismanaged and wrecked, they continued to hold their parties at night. Oh, they had a great time. They complained all day and danced all night. And they had their champagne and they had their food, just as if nothing was wrong. But during the day, as they became more panicky, more scared, they finally decided to take action, and they did. Several of the men who were the leaders in the hostile meeting, there was a certain man in any group, you can find him in any group, who was very loudmouthed, very assertive, very bold, and very rude, and very stupid. He yelled out, "We're going to take over this ship ourselves. We know more than the captain does." And so enough of the men and the women too, followed the man, and they took over the ship. The captain forced to take his uniform off, put on regular clothes. And the big leader of the group put on the captain's uniform, which was kind of ridiculous because it didn't fit. But he didn't care about that, whether it fit or not, whether it was made for him or not. He was now the self-appointed captain. And the first thing he did was to give a speech. He assembled everyone in the big dining hall. And he said, "I have marvelous news for you. I've taken over this ship, and I know about ships. I've done it before, and I'll bring you safely to harbor." And they all applauded. And they praised his courage and daring for taking over where the other captain had failed. And he modestly acknowledged their applause and went up to the bridge and began to steer the boat, which for the next 6 or 7 days went in circles again. At the end of 6 days, another group now plotted against the new captain and kicked him out. And now they had another captain for 6, 7 days. The ship continued to go into a circle. A new captain. In the space of 2 or 3 weeks, they had several captains. And again, at night, they continued to dance and drink champagne and have fun and carry on with their pleasurable lives. While all this was going on, there was one passenger who didn't take part in the mutiny, in the complaining, in the general insanity that went on the boat. There was one passenger, a man, who stood aside and watched everything that was going on. And he understood quite clearly that the ship had been damaged, that it was no longer a safe ship, that everyone on, ladies, gentlemen, everyone on board the ship was in danger. The reason they were in danger is because they didn't know they were in danger. But this one man sat over in a corner during his meals and studied the whole situation. And he took walks up on the deck from time to time. He didn't know what he could do about it, but he did know one thing. Everyone on that ship was insane. That was clear. Everyone pretended they knew the answers, if we went this way or if we went that way, and they weren't even capable of steering the ship this way or that way. And yet they talked about going east and going north and going over to this island. They couldn't even direct the ship anyway. So this one passenger pondered what was going on. And one night, as he taking a walk out on the deck, he didn't take part in the parties. And the drinking was still going on with a little more intensity, by the way, because they were getting scareder and scareder. He went up on the deck, walked along, leaned against the rail, and looked out. And one night, he thought he heard something different. One night, he thought he heard a sound. Listen to this. A sound of some kind. It was too vague. A sound that wasn't coming from the ship. He knew it wasn't part of the faulty motor down there grinding away. It wasn't part of the shouts of the passengers who were now half drunk. He knew it wasn't something from the ship itself, but was coming from outside the ship. Out in the fog, something was coming, if he heard something at all. He wasn't sure. But he thought he did. Next night, he took another walk out on the deck. Same thing. He was sure now that he had heard something, but what was it? What direction was it coming from? What significance did it have? He just didn't know. But he wanted to be daring toward what he heard. So he went to the present captain, about the seventh one, and he said, I was up on the deck and I heard something that might be something wise for us to investigate. I heard a sound. I don't know what it was, but I heard out in the fog, I heard something, and I'd like to take one of those little motorboats you have stacked down below deck there and wander around the ship a little bit and see if I can find it, see what it is. Might be rescue of some kind. Oh, the captain just laughed. He said, okay, if you want to, but not me. If you want to go off this ship where it's safe, if you want to leave this safe ship, you go ahead. Take the boat. We'll help you some men to get it down in the water for you if you want. But we're staying here. So he took the boat, started up the motor, and went out. Dreadfully foggy, heavy waves, and he was scared. But he went away from the ship 100 yards, 200 yards, and looked out and listened. Didn't hear anything. He came back. Next night, tried it again and went out. He thought he heard something, but he wasn't sure. Brought the boat back, went out again. Did he hear something or not? He wasn't quite sure. And what was it? Came on back. Let me tell you, let me interrupt the story to tell you that he was a pretty torn man. He was loaded with doubts and confusions and fears. He knew he was in a dangerous place, but he didn't know what to do about it. And even the faint hope he had had of the sound out there in the fog, whatever it was too vague. In fact, it taunted him, it seemed, at this point. So he stayed on the ship, again not taking part in the madness that was now going on, and the people who were pretending that all was well, when in their hearts they knew it wasn't. He couldn't go along with that anymore. But he had his own problems. He was on that ship himself, and he was in danger, and he knew it. For the first time, he knew it fully. One night he was in the dining hall. Plenty of food and drink on board, no problems with food. Over in the corner of the dining hall, and he noticed a woman about his own age deliberately walk over and sit at a table next to him. And he knew that she had done it deliberately, but he didn't notice that either. So he sat there and had his dinner quietly, quite aware that she was sitting next to him at the table. And he knew that she was trying to get up enough courage to talk to him. So a little later she did. She got up, and he could see the timidity in her eyes. She came over and asked, may I sit down? He said, please do. And they sat and looked at each other a little bit. And she was trembling, and he was wondering, and her eyes were moist. But there was a certain firmness, a certain type of firmness in her voice when she spoke after being seated. And she looked up at the man, and she said, I heard it too. And when he heard that, he knew what she meant. And he began to think, maybe I'm not deluded after all. Maybe I'm not mentally lost after all. He said, you heard it too? And he didn't want to lead her into the answer. He wanted to hear it from her. He said, you heard it too? And she said, yes. I saw you up on deck wandering along that foggy walkway. And I was just curious, wondering what you were doing, because I noticed you never took part in the parties and the madness and the shouting and screaming and the meetings they had when they replaced the captain. I noticed that, and I was just curious enough to stand at a distance and watch and see what you did. And I saw you give a shift of your head at the same time that I heard something out there, so I know that you heard it too. I heard what you had, and then they broke down, got easily talking with each other, and they discussed it back and forth. What's it all about? I don't know what it's all about. The man said, I've been going out several times, as you may know, trying to find the source of this sound, but I haven't found it. And I'm baffled because sometimes I went out, I heard it, I think, and other times I didn't. It's utterly confusing. I don't know the answer, but I know that sound did not come from the ship. There is something out there. And she said, may I go with you next time? He said, fine. So that night, I got in the boat. A little later, they got in the boat, and they went out. And just because they were together didn't make them feel any safer, because the sea waves were pretty furious, and the night was pretty dark, and the fog was pretty thick. So they wandered around a little bit, saw nothing, heard nothing, came on back, went out every night after that for 7 or 8 days, saw nothing, heard nothing, came on back. And they always made sure that they never wandered too far from the boat, from the ship, the liner, because they didn't want to be lost all alone in a small little boat out in that terrible sea. But one night, they went out, and they sensed that they were at a considerable distance from the boat, and they knew they had to make a decision to either go back to the boat this one time or not go back, but to keep going in search of the sound, whatever it was, if it existed. He finally said to her, this time we're not going back. She nodded her head. We won't go back. And they didn't. As they looked at each other, wondering what was going to become of them, the fog closed in between them and the liner, closed off their view, and they never ever saw it again. And when that fog closed in so thick so that they lost sight of the liner, their terror was complete. Their loneliness and their agony was complete. But they knew they had no choice but to do what they did. Something, they didn't know what it was, something made the choice for them. And they were absolutely terrified. Now they were really alone. Nothing to go back to. Nothing. They wandered around for a long, long time. And they got pretty hungry. And they got thirsty. But they never made the slightest attempt to try to find the boat in the fog again. It was complete. They weren't going back. Whatever was going to happen to them is going to happen to them, but it wasn't going back to the boat trying to find it again. That was the end of going back. And then one morning, they heard the sound again, and they knew what it was. It was very clear, and it was repeated over and over and over. And they looked at each other, and they knew that the sound they heard was the one they'd heard on the boat so far away. It was a bell. A bell that was a deep bell that was ringing over and over and over and over. It never stopped ringing now. They heard it clearly, and they knew the direction it was in. And a great thrill went through them because they knew they had found land. There was a definite direction. It wasn't a moving boat. It was solid land off there somewhere in the fog. So they turned the boat toward it. The sound got louder and clearer as they cut through the fog. And pretty soon, right in front of them was the shore. They pulled up on the shore, and it was all clear there. The fog was in back of them now. And they saw a trail. It was an island of some kind. And they saw a trail going up the ascent of the island, man-made trail. They knew men had been there. And they walked up the trail, walked up about a mile, till they got to the top of the island itself, a small island. But at the top they saw a cabin. And when they reached the top, a man came out of the cabin, and he nodded, just as if he had done it many times before. Nodded and said, "Welcome." He said, "You heard the bell?" They said, "Yes." He said, "You might be interested in seeing it." So he took them over a little short distance, some trees, through some trees, a little grove there, and there it was. Great, enormous bell, fixed up so that the wind activated it, and the great clapper inside hit against the inside of the bell. Carried miles and miles and miles out to sea 24 hours of the day. And they understood now why they hadn't heard it all the time when they were on the ship. Because the ship alternately came close and drifted away. Some nights you could hear it because it was close. Other nights you could, that was clear. That made sense. Now he understood. So they went back to the cabin, and the man explained, "The reason I'm here is because you're here now. You see, that's a pretty treacherous sea out there, and people get on pleasure ships, and the same thing happens to them that happened to you. So I was authorized and instructed to come to this small island and set up the bell that you heard. And indeed, over the years, I've been here a long, long time, over the years, a number of people have done exactly what you have done. Not a lot. And I'm sure you understand why. Now that you have made it here to the island, you understand why a lot of people don't come here. For example, do you know what the people on the ship are doing right now? And they said, "Of course we know." And they all knew, all three of them knew. The party is going on. The pretense that something is going to turn up, something is going to happen to rescue them, is so deeply a habit inside them that that's the way they're going to drift for the rest of their lives. By some miracle, the man in charge of the bell said, certain people see through the falsehoods on board, the pretense that any man on board can rescue them, which he can't. The fakery of pretending that you're happy. Certain people, as you two have done, see through it. And the seeing through it is what invites the daring to do what you did. I know what you've been through. By the way, he said, I've been through it myself, so I understand every stage that you've gone through. And I was finally appointed here to help others to do what I did many years ago. The passengers are society. And I've described to you very briefly the kind of a condition that all of you in this room and watching this film have described your condition. And I know where you are, whether you know it or not, and I know what you are doing. You may not be drinking champagne, and you may not like social parties, but I'll ask you, all of you, every one of you in this room, what are you doing to pretend that you're not lost when you really are? What particular gimmicks are you using? For example, do you go down to your bunk at night and lay on your cot on the ship and close your eyes and dream that you're on land? Maybe that's your particular kind of escape. Or maybe you're the one who stands up at the meeting and tells everybody else, if only you were the captain, you could steer it to shore. That would be a very daring investigation for you to find out where you're pretending that all is well. And I know you cry. I know that you are angry. I know that you are frustrated. And I also know the one chance you have. And I'll give you a preliminary hint of it. When you go out of this meeting tonight, don't do it now, you're not capable of it. When you go out of this meeting tonight, when you're all alone, don't do it with other people. They'll try to keep you back on the ship. All your friends want you to stay on the ship. When you're alone sometime, you very honestly look inside yourself. And don't you tell one lie. You be honest about how terrified you are, how anyone and anything can frighten you. And don't you have the nerve, don't you dare have the nerve to scoff at the truth, which is the bell. You're committing a very serious crime against yourself if you do. And you don't know how deeply hidden the scoffs are inside you. How deeply hidden. One purpose of this class is to show you how you pretend that you are having a good time at the party, and yet you go home and cry. Now look, you are not aware that there is a bell yet. You're far from even hearing the first sound of it, because you're so weak that you want to join the party down in the ballroom and put on funny hats and make a lot of noise and drink lots of liquid and laugh and tell stories and dance around, so that you don't have to face the fact that you're on a floundering ship, and you are, and you had better start facing it tonight. Well, for your sake, not mine. What you do with your life is not my concern. My concern is to tell you the truth about the situation. Then the choice is yours. If you will proceed along the lines that the man and the woman did, you will someday, some night you'll hear something that's not coming from your own acquired psychic system, not coming from your own memory, not coming from your own greeds, not coming from your own pretenses, and you'll sense that this is something new, something real, that's coming from a distance, that's coming from a very safe place. And if you go on with your cosmic curiosity, if you go up on that deck every night while the rest of them are down there faking it out, you go up on that deck and listen, you'll be guided every step from the deck of that ship to the safe shore where rescue will come. and we'll take a 10-minute break. Responsibility develops with the knowledge of what it means to be responsible. A small child can begin to be told about responsibility and given practical exercises such as mowing the lawn in developing it. And he can begin to get the idea that the time will come in his or her life when he or she must properly be on his own. This is elementary responsibility, and every parent who really loves their child, who cares for their child, who understands a little bit himself about life, will most certainly give that child responsibility so that the main lesson behind it will begin to develop early. The lesson that you are here on earth to live your life, not someone else's life, and not try to steal someone else's life, but to develop your very own existence here on earth. If a child can begin to get the lesson that's given to him, and which is so often failed to be given to him, if a child can see that he must do certain things in order to gain other things, that idea will become properly fixed in his mind. As much as he rebels against it at the start, any little child, the first time a parent tells him, now you empty the trash, you take it from the kitchen out to the alley back there. The first several times, he's not able to understand it. Why? Because up to this point of his life, everything has been done for him. As he gets to be 5, he develops certain elementary responsibilities. He gets to be 10, he develops more. Now, a person who has developed this elementary responsibility is the only person who is qualified to shift from social responsibility to spiritual responsibility. You remember how often we've said here that only if your intellect, your mind, your ordinary intellect begins to work properly can you begin to rise above it. Because if you use it to the full extent that you can use it in running your business and taking care of your home, you will see that indeed there are limitations to it. And when you see the limitations of your mind, it makes you very curious and very eager to see if there's something higher than that elementary responsibility. Now, a person who has not developed certain preliminary training in doing certain things for himself, when he gets a little older, he will make a decision, and most people make the wrong decision. He will make a decision to either begin to go back and develop them from the start, or he will decide to go all the way in the other direction, which is abandonment of responsibility, abandonment of the opportunity that he has here to grow into something different. As a matter of fact, he will never know that he's missed the point of life because he didn't take the first elementary responsibilities that were given to him. Now, we've already talked about social responsibility, taking care of yourself, earning your own living, doing certain practical things with your life that everyone must do. You've seen that that is essential. But you must take your social responsibilities not because you're forced to do them, but because you see that they're a natural outcome of your present level, a present necessity of your present level. And that way you don't resent them, you just go ahead and do them because you know they're the right thing to do, and you understand that they are maybe the 3rd or 4th or 5th grade, which if you perform them properly, you can go on up to higher grades until the time comes, maybe, in some cases, where you've seen that you have done all you can for yourself, and you're still not happy. You're not fulfilled. You've been very responsible in taking care of your business, yes, of course, and you made a lot of money. And you can't figure out why all that nice home and that nice respectable family and all that hasn't given you any completion, no inner completion. You can't figure out why, if you have done your responsibilities up on the social level, if you've done that, how come you're not happy? A person reaching this stage where he has become mentally mature, up to a degree, mentally mature, runs into a very difficult situation which a careless person, a lazy person, never reaches. Because you've come up to the point where you've said, I've done everything I can do. Look, I've taken responsibility for myself. I've done everything I can do to be happy, and yet I know in my heart that it's been denied me. This is a wonderful experience for anyone who goes this far, because it's the beginning of the breaking down of self-delusions in which you say, I can make myself happy. That's a falsehood. But you'll never know it's a falsehood until you've gone beyond the preliminary responsibilities of taking care of yourself. When you get to a certain point then, you begin to question all of life. And a certain new, listen to this please, a certain new kind of bitterness enters into you. Some of you may recognize what I'm talking about in your own experiences. A new kind of feeling that you've been cheated. And isn't this strange now? Here you're successful, maybe you have a nice home and you have all the things that society says you should have. You have all these things, and yet you still feel cheated, and it's a very confusing emotion, because you feel as if you've missed something, but what is it? You look around, what is it? I've got everything you said I should have, the money, the home, the car, and the power, and the influence. I've got all that, and yet there's something missing. What is it? That's the question, isn't it? Well, it's a long, long ways yet from where you first start to say, what is it that I'm missing, until you finally find it. Because when you ask the question, you will answer it, won't you? Who else is going to answer the question? If it isn't this wife, then it's another wife, right? If it isn't this husband, then it's that nicer looking man that I met the other day. If it isn't all this money, then it has to be travel. That's it. Money was made to spend, so I'll go traveling somewhere. What I've described to you, these external things, is a very, very small part of the person's world in which he's beginning to wonder why he isn't fulfilled. And he'll look inward to himself and ask himself all sorts of questions. He'll say, well, maybe it is indeed something inside me. I know what it is. I'm not spiritual enough. So he'll get what he calls a religious experience of some kind. Or he'll get whatever he calls kind of excitement that seems to satisfy him. The inner and the outer working together. Only the person who keeps the question alive will ever come to the final right conclusion of what his responsibility is in life. Now, keeping the question alive means to never settle for any kind of an answer you can get out of your own mind or the mind of any other human being. This means you're going to have to search not in just 1,000 places, because this is the characteristic of the mind, to search, but 10,000 places. And when you get to 10,000, you'll say it's the 10,001. And when you get to 50,000, you'll say it's 50,001. It's always the next, right? It's always the next thing that's going to fill up this void, this heartache, this sadness in the face and the sadness in the voice. If you keep the question alive, but what is it, long enough, and keep going long enough till everything is exhausted, you will then indeed come to the question, the right question: what is my true responsibility as a human being who's been put here on earth? The question will become the answer will become very clear to you. You've heard the question, and the answer becomes very clear after, just to pull a figure out of the air, after 100,000 goals, aims, whether you've succeeded or failed in them, so that you never again ask the question, what is the next thing, and will that do it? Because you know there is no answer. You knew it years ago. You knew it when you're furiously trying to make all that money and making all these human contacts and making all this effort to be liked by the people down at the office. You knew it way down deep inside that you weren't going to succeed the way you were going, but you still wouldn't stop and examine that feeling that says you're on the wrong track. And if anyone ever tried to tell you the truth, you would reach inside your own mind for infantile reactions to immature irresponsibilities. You would reach inside your own mind and come up with the usual answer to anything that tries to get anything through your head. And those reactions are as varied as the rocks out in the field there. One of the most terribly successful rejection of the truth that's trying to tell us we're on the wrong track and put us on the right track. One of the most commonplace rejections is ignoring. Is being very careful that you're in a position where you can ignore the gnawing, the haunting that's going inside of you, so that you can ignore it and do something exciting instead. This will make it necessary for you to have a stock of angry responses ready at any given moment. Because at any given moment, no matter where you go, there's always this sensing way deep down inside that you are being irresponsible, that you're not taking proper adult responsibility, spiritual responsibility for yourself. And your lives are then spent in finding ways to get out of doing what you know you must do. The power of this class is that we won't let you go down the path to your own destruction. We're calling out to you, just a minute. Slow down. Take a look. We're not trying to hurt you, which you think. We're trying to get you to take a look at yourself as you are, in your irresponsibility, in your childishness, in your evasiveness, in your wish to turn aside and run off like a little child, instead of slowing down long enough to say something terribly shocking to yourself. Let's see if you have ever said the following, or whether you're willing to say the following. I have been wrong all my life. Here I am, and state your age to yourself. Do you think, whatever your age may be, those of you in this class or those of you watching this film, are you able to look at your age, whatever it may be, and have the responsibility, the spiritual responsibility, because we're going above social success into authentic spiritual success. Are you able to slow down long enough and say to yourself, you don't have to say it to anyone else, keep it to yourself, I've been wrong about everything all my life. And the evidence is so clear right in front of me that I don't want to ignore it anymore. I've tried arrogance, I've tried refusal, I've tried weeping, I've tried running away, and whenever I run away, I go right in a circle and come back and find myself right where I started. But with not quite the same feeling of despair I had before, it is now increased. Because I am now beginning to recognize, although I don't want to recognize it, that no matter what I do, in my way, I always come back to the same scenes, the same kind of people, the same kind of experiences, the same inner trembling, the same dazedness, the same glee over having something to look forward to. I'll tell you, you take away the looking forward tos from people, and you would see their faces collapse right in front of you. What do you think that keeps their so-called happy faces looking happy and looking serene? The fact that when they come to a meeting like this, or they go to work, in their minds they're thinking of what they're going to be doing 3 hours, 10 hours, 2 weeks from now, and that's what keeps them going. And when we get up to that point, they get a certain thrill out of it for just a few minutes, and then they find themselves right back where they started. Now, spiritual maturity can solve all this running around in a circle. But you can't start with spiritual maturity. You have to start with social, mental immaturity. You have to see that you're not responsible for yourself. You had better see how your worship of other human beings, whether it's a politician or a religious officer or a relative or a dream man or a dream woman, you have to see that you don't have any responsibility for discovering why you worship someone else, why you follow someone else, why you want someone else to think for you and to tell you what to do. I'll tell you, you had better look into the kindergarten level of your own mind and see how much work you have to do way down there in this lower grade. Don't you dare think that you can think about spiritual principles, spiritual maturity, spiritual responsibility. Don't you dare think that you can even think about it properly yet. You can't even think about it. And that's a low level of it. Because true spirituality is above thinking about it. You can't even think about it yet. What you can think about is to see how sad-faced and sad-voiced you are presently. Now, can you see that right in front of you is a sign of irresponsibility? Take the word self-interest. That can be applied to financial self-interest, marriage self-interest, sex self-interest, social self-interest of 1,000 kinds. Some of them are legitimate, some of them are not. It's certainly to your self-interest to have bread on the table, to have a roof over your head. We're not talking about that. Can you see where you have refused to start, as I just said, at the lower levels, and see how lazy you are to think so that you don't even think about your condition? It's very curious. If you start to think about your irresponsibility, you won't like it. You won't like it because you don't like to call yourself irresponsible, because you call yourself mature. If there's anyone in this room or anyone watching this film who's going to make it out of themselves, and think about that phrase for a minute, going to make it out of themselves, that's the point of life. If there's anyone here who's going to do that, please don't think about spiritual matters. That is easy to do. Anyone can do that. Then you can settle down to your gloomy little worship of what you call God. You can settle down to your monotonous little life. Listen to this, please. Your spiritless life, in which you have no energy at all, except to complain, except to feel sorry for yourself. When you get to the point where you can think about spiritual maturity, spiritual ideas, you will see that it consists of a falling away process. It doesn't consist of anything you can do. It doesn't consist of anything you can go toward. It consists of you working inwardly so hard that you understand that things must come to you. You cannot go to them. If you go to them, if you say, I am going toward maturity, toward responsibility on any level, I am going toward responsibility, who is going toward it except your own wish, your own desire, backed up by wrong self-interest? All right, to the word self-interest again. Think about the word self-interest. Now, when you think about it, you will have to, right now, refer to what you think is yourself. Your self-interest. That means, you think it means the interest of your physical body, of your social self, of your pocketbook maybe, of your relations with other people. But we have to use the word self-interest. Let's put a capital S on it so that you can understand that the kind of self-interest, the only kind that is valuable to you and that's enduring to you, is a self-interest with a capital S, which is not connected in any way with your ordinary self. Now we have a word problem a little bit, maybe a little bit out of the way. This supreme self-interest is 100% responsibility, 100% maturity, because it's the very nature, and it can't be anything but that. And I've told you before, and I've described to you that kind of a life, where you have right responsibility, you have the right responsibility because you haven't had false responsibility toward your false life. I repeat, you have not had false responsibility toward your false life, which is all that your present life consists of. And I wonder, up to this point in the talk, if you have been aware of any of your reactions, any of the ideas that have come up in your mind since I've been talking, have you watched the operation of your own mind? That would be the beginning of the responsibility that the gentleman asked about. Responsibility meaning that you are going to go back to elementary education in order to gather the self-knowledge that can begin to lead towards self-change. But if you take it for granted, if you toss it off and say, I don't need anything that's being talked about in that class because I already understand myself and already understand life, you're committing a gross crime against yourself. Put the following picture in your mind. Someone who hears truth, someone who hears mature and responsible principles given to them, they hear them. And that person lightly turns away and scoffs and says, I don't need that. I already have that. How can any human being, well, you know and we all know, how can any human being deliberately commit such a crime against himself as to lightly toss off these truths? To turn away and say, I already have that. I already know that. Now I'm talking to you here in this room, and you're listening to this talk and watching this talk. I'm asking you whether you might be so irresponsible, so immature, that you are not taking seriously the things that should be taken seriously by you because your life is involved. Are you taking responsibility for finding something higher from yourself, higher than yourself, if you are still in a state of dishonesty, in a state of sadness? Are you taking responsibility? Or are you brushing it aside like we all brushed aside the responsibilities as much as we could get away with when we were small children? A small child either learns his responsibilities or he doesn't, and there are many factors involved in that, individual factors involved in it. The right sternness of the parents, for example, and the character of the child himself. But let me tell you, you are no longer small children. You are no longer small children who can endlessly push away your responsibilities for growing up inwardly. Don't you dare brush aside what we're saying here tonight by saying, I'm responsible. I earn my own living. I take care of my own home. I vote at election time. I do everything that an ordinary citizen does that is called responsible behavior. I wonder, please, do you know that we're talking in this room about another world? No, you don't. That's why you ask questions that I just mentioned. You don't have it through your heads yet that there is another world. That's what we're concerned with. We do talk about the social world, the world of families, of economics, of homes, of the relations between a man and a woman. We talk about those things because they are a part of this world. But you don't know that this world is not the only world. Oh dear. You did it again. I know what you just did. You went into ideas. And you went into ideas about how much religious literature you've read, and how you pray, and how you believe in God. That is not the other world. That's this world. But you don't see it. You're not capable, because of your irresponsibility, of seeing that this world is not that world. If you were really mature, spiritually mature, you could see two worlds. You could understand. You could understand that there is a physical world. Of course there is. And there is a world of economics, a world of sex, a world of marriage, a world of work. There is that world. And you are a slave to it. You are its victim. Every day you're its victim. Oh, excuse me. Every hour. Excuse me again. Every minute you're a victim of it. And you can't figure it out. You can't figure it out because you just said that you're religious or spiritual or you're a positive thinker. If you were all these great things, how come you're still a victim? You are, and you know it, and I know it. I'm trying to lead you to another world which, when you live in it, this will be the one world for you, even while living in this one. When you live in the other world, you also live in this one, and this one becomes completely easy, becomes very light. No burden at all. It's no burden because you're not a part of this old world's burden. You're living in the other world. And you'll go out and conduct your business, or you'll be an employee somewhere, and you'll talk to people. You'll live in a home with other people, or you'll live alone, whatever your choice might be. See, the problem in giving a talk like this is that I'm talking about things which your present irresponsible mind can't comprehend. And one characteristic of an irresponsible mind is to reject that which does not conform to its previous concepts. A lazy mind looks out, and unless it's flattered, it says that is wrong. Unless someone agrees with it, it says that person is wrong. That's what a lazy mind does. Among the other things we're trying to do in this class is to cease to be lazy, is to jolt ourselves awake and begin to try to understand where we make the mistake. And already tonight you've been told perhaps 24 ways in which you've made a mistake. For example, the idea of setting up a hero who's going to rescue you. And that hero that you set up, whoever you might be, whatever it might be, your dream of the future, for example, that hero is going to be a projection of your own low mind. So what you are really worshiping is yourself. What greater horror could there be than you worshiping the self that has kept you in the state, the dark state that you're in right now? Do you understand that this is what you're doing? Now you can go out of here with your usual childish anger if you want. You could go out of here and with your usual irresponsibility push aside everything you've heard. And I will give you a guarantee. I will guarantee you that your pain, that your sad heart, and your sad face, and your sad voice will continue to trap you and continue to make you miserable as it has before. That's a guarantee. Now I want to explain that before we take a break. When you tell people this, that they're going to continue in their pain, they don't understand the horror of that. Because they are so much in love with their tears that they're not going to let them go simply because some man says that tears are bad. Because tears being them, their life, they're going to hang on to them. If there's one of you here watching this film or in this room, if there's one of you here who can begin to challenge your love of sadness, you have a chance to become a mature human being, a responsible human being, and therefore a human being who doesn't hurt other people. If you are spiritually irresponsible, even though you may be socially responsible, if you're spiritually irresponsible, you hurt everyone you touch. There's no choice but for you to do that, because this is what you are. Your irresponsibility, spiritually speaking, is a sign of being an unawakened person, a person in a daze, a person who still glorifies his own efforts and says, look what I've accomplished in this world. And you will be filled with arrogance. You'll be very touchy if anyone touches you where you're telling a lie about yourself and about one. Therefore, you will hurt everyone on earth, including those that you claim to care for. This is pretty strong stuff. Is there one here tonight who wants the strong medicine? You know the sentence, the medicine is bitter, but it cures. Time to grow up, little children. Time to see that what you've been doing up to this point in your life is irresponsibility that is punishing you every day. If you want everything changed, then you come back to a class like this, or you watch a film like this again, similar films to it. You watch them over and over, in spite of the fact that there's a part of you that doesn't want to. And there is that. As a matter of fact, there is a voice in you that screams, don't go back. If you're smart, if you're a really wise man or woman, you won't listen to that voice. You listen to another very, very quiet voice that says, you have been told the truth tonight. Go back. Go back and listen, even if you don't want to. Go back, even if you don't want to. So the whole new kind of self directs your life, so that you're authentically free and happy and authentically innocent human being. You say you want to be happy? If you really want to be happy, you can be. But it's not your idea of happiness, because your idea of happiness is thrillism, is to get an excitement over something. Even to get angry is your idea of happiness. That's your idea of happiness, to get so angry that you make your physical body sick and you make your spirit sick. That's your idea of happiness. You'd better change it. And this is the place where you can do exactly that. Isn't that nice? Take a 10-minute break.